I know 2 minutes. Just please start.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation. As he mentioned, I am Cristina Jiménez. I am a first-year PhD student here at the Institute, and I will present a bit what I've been doing during the first months of my PhD, because like I just started, let's say. So, let's see why I cannot move the slides. It stopped working, but I don't know why. What's going on?
No, I guess the problem is with your computer now, because it's not reacting.
It just froze. Okay.
Yeah, share it.
Any
case, this doesn't work. So
okay, so I
go.
will use my hands and the computer, but I hope that you can understand everything, so no problem. So the summary of my talk, so basically I will start with a brief review of Supernovae Type 1a. We had few talks about Supernovae Type 1a during the seminars the last month, so I will try to be brief and didactic as much as I can. Then I will proceed to talk about like host galaxies of Supernovae Type 1a to give you a bit of like theoretical background of why I am doing my work, basically. And then like the last 2 sections would be basically what I've been doing during my first months of my PhD, which can be summarized as a pipeline of IFS analysis. So I will explain what I'm doing and like the future work of this pipeline. So Supernovae Type 1a. So well, this is like a very basic scheme of how can we classify supernovae in terms of the lines that they have. So in all this scheme, we are interested in this one, the type 1a, which doesn't have hydrogen, but has strong like helium emission lines. So yeah, as we can see here, we can see the spectra of the different types. Here we can see in the top, type 1a, we see the lack of hydrogen and strong helium. So now that we know how we classify this spectra regarding this, regarding the emission lines, now we want to know like how these supernovae like they explode. So we have a scenario of multiple progenitor scenarios. So this is not like a simpler scenario. We have like different types of progenitors, different type of explosions. So the common thing in the progenitor is that always we have a white dwarf, and we can have like single, double, even triple degeneracy, and we can also have like core degenerate. So yeah. So now let's go to the science, to the cosmology on the thing that probably you are most interested in. So as we can see here, supernovae type 1a have been broadly used in cosmology because they are standardizable. And this is done because we have some empirical relationships that were discovered quite ago. So we can see here on the top, like the few light curves of supernovae type 1a. And then when we correct using these empirical relations, we can see clear standardization. So like the first relationships were like the light curve shape versus like the peak luminosity relationship that was like discovered quite ago, like before I was born, 1993, 1977. And then like we have like the color versus peak luminosity, which is widely used. And nowadays we use light curve models and features to obtain these standardizations. These are the most usual ones. So what I mentioned before were like photometric relationships with the standardization. But we know now that these relationships with the standardization are not only applicable like for photometry. So here there's an example. This is like the color correction. We can see in the axis like the delta 15, well, the magnitude, and here we can see the excess of color. So what we can see is that this standardization is also dependent of spectroscopy properties. So the red and the blue are two samples of supernovae, which have like normal and high velocity. And what you can see here is that we have two lines. So we can see that we have a different value for these two subsamples. This is important because what we can see is that the spectroscopy variables are also important to improve these standardizations, because as you can see, like there's separate behavior of them. This like makes us think that, okay, we know that, let's study the spectroscopic properties. So as you can imagine, studying like the supernovae, it's not like super easy in terms of like observational stuff. So one of the things that we are doing now is say, okay, let's study where they are. So the host galaxies. And why is this is important? So here you can see very different, like super different galaxies. And if you don't have like prior information, if we didn't know anything, we couldn't say, okay, all the galaxies are equal, because we know that they are not. So we need to assume that we can find supernovae in very different environments. So we need to study them. So one of the things also that make this important is that, as I said before, we are using type 1a supernovae to do cosmology, and to have like very precise measurements of the distance, we need to have like very, very precise measurements. So one of the problems that we have now with the Hubble tension is the systematics. So we need to study all the possible correlations that we have with the standardized luminosities, with like, let's say, galaxy properties, like stellar mass, star formation rate, morphology, all the properties that the galaxies that host a supernovae can have. So one of the first things that were important to know is that supernovae that are in more massive galaxies are overcorrected when we do this standardization. So let me explain a bit what I'm saying. So here you can see like the magnitude, well, this is the delta 15, but for this like should mean the same. So we can see here like different morphological types. This is elliptical galaxies, this dot, can you see it? Because like it's, yeah. So we can see that in theory, these supernovae are fainter in this subtype, which are also the more mass. So now let's go to the standardization correction. What happens? If this standardization was good and were obtaining like the magnitudes that we should expect these points to be like this. But that's not necessarily true. As we can see, this goes down. So what it means is that these galaxies, which are the most massive, so probably an elliptical galaxy, are overcorrected. And for that reason, they seem to be more luminous. So when you obtain the value with the standardization, you could say, wow, they are more luminous than the others. But that's not necessarily true. It's because of the standardization. And yeah, that's important because like if we see that there are like different properties that we can obtain in terms of the mass of the galaxy when we do like this standardization, it means that we need to study the other properties, because the stellar mass is also related to the star formation rate, which is also related like to the specific star formation rate. So all of these variables are strongly related among them. That's why we need to study all of them. And we cannot say just like, let's study one. We need to study all the correlations. So until now, I'd said, okay, let's study all the properties of these host galaxies. But here we see a galaxy. Here we see the supernovae. This is so big. So do you think that it's really good to study the properties of a whole galaxy when we want to study it? So multiple studies just realize that probably there's a better approach. So instead of doing this global analysis of the host galaxy, why we don't do this? Study just like a tiny environment around the supernovae. So that's why like we should try to analyze like the local properties of the environment instead of just like the global. And also that's a good thing because we need to compare them and see if we can see like noticeable differences. So, I mean, that sounds really good in theory. Let's say just study like this environment, but I mean, the observational techniques are not like magic and we cannot observe like wherever we want to, like super easier. So until like quite recently, most of these studies of like host galaxies properties in terms of the like global galaxy were done using photometry or single like slit spectroscopy. So when we use these techniques, you cannot have like spatial information of all the points of the galaxy. Most of the cases when you do like single slit spectroscopy, you put the slit here and you have like the slit in the center, probably like you get EGN contamination and all of this stuff, which makes this analysis more complicated. So for that instance, using 2D spectroscopy, it's crucial because we are interested in obtaining like the spatial properties, not just like one point that we can obtain like in photometry or just like putting the slit here and getting like the spectroscopy and that's it. And that's exactly what I am doing in my research. So let's talk about that. So as I said, I am using IFS. This is in the like title of my talk. So what is IFS? So like in simple terms, I would say that IFS is just a 2D spatially resolved spectroscopy. So instead of just like having one slit, one point, you get the spatial properties like of all the like spaxels that you get. And one can think about it like the mix of like imaging and spectroscopy, because like you get the spectroscopy, but at the same time you get like the spatial properties. So you can say, I want to know what's happening here. I can know this value. I want to know what's happening here. I can know it too. That's the good thing. So now that I explained the techniques, I would show you which data I'm using. So basically, I am using IFS cubes from 3 samples at the moment. So I am using cubes from PMAS, which is an instrument hosted in Calaralto Observatory in Spain. Then I am using cubes from MUSE. And also I am using cubes from MaNGA from like the law and digital stuff. So these are like one example of each galaxies that I am actually using for my work. So you should expect something like this. So now that I explained the data and the type of observational technique that I use, what I'm actually doing, what is my analysis? So as I said, we are interested in like global and local analysis. So what I do is basically 3 things. First of all, integrate the spectra of the whole galaxy and then like get one spectra. This is an example of what I do. Second step, we want to get like the local analysis. So we get like the spectra integrated in a region, which can be like around a few kiloparsecs. And we get this. And then what we do is to obtain the maps. So what we do is to obtain like the spatial analysis. We get the spectra in all the spaxels. So we get like the spatial properties. And this is very interesting because we can do some kind of maps, as I will show you afterwards. So how I do that? We have the cube. We need to do some stuff. So first of all, we do some processing. We basically like clean extinction, resample, this kind of stuff. Then for like the spatial analysis, we use some binning algorithms if necessary. And then we take these cubes and we put it into the spectral synthesis. So as I said before, in some cases for the maps, I use some binning algorithms. The reason of that is because sometimes you get a cube which has some spaxels that have like low signal to noise, which makes the data probably not the best reliable. So there are these kind of algorithms of what they do is that they sum the value of the spaxels on all the regions until you get a threshold of signal to noise that you need to consider your data reliable. So the value of the flux that you obtain here, here, here in the same like region of color will be exactly the same. So this is another type of algorithm which mainly does something similar, but what it does is to create some kind of ordering maps. So in the most rather spaxels, you can see that it keeps like the original data, and then it keeps accumulating the value of the spaxels in an order of n up to the 2 to the square. And what it does is to sum and also like to keep summing until you get like this desired threshold. So let's say for my analysis, I need a signal to noise of 10. So let's like get all the map with this signal to noise so we can get like reliable data. This is a bit better than the older one because what you get is that you can keep like the structure of the galaxy, which is something that it's not quite obvious in the previous like algorithm. So once I'm done with all the pre-processing, what we are interested is to obtain the star formation history and to get like all the mission values, to get the masses, the ages, distribution, and all this stuff. So to do that, the first approach that we use is it's a code that is called Starlight. This is not done by me. This is a code which was wrote by Fernandez quite ago. So what it does, it uses some templates and it feeds your spectra. And then basically what you obtain is a star formation history. And this allows to obtain you for afterwards, like the metallicities, the mean ages, the masses, and all this stuff. But quite later, they decided to like improve, let's say, this code and to allow you to add not only like the spectra that we were putting there, but also photometry. Why? So let's look at here. So you can see like the red and the blue properly. Everyone can see it? Good. So when you use like only this information, which is the black, what happens is that if you try to do the fitting like in a spectral range, which is outside like the actual spectra, so sometimes it can like superestimate or underestimate these values. So when you add photometry, in that case, like these points, you can see that you get a different value, which is actually like more reliable because this like estimates like a higher value. And this is important because you could say, well, it's just a fit, yeah, but then the distribution of the ages and then the whole like star formation history changes because you are getting like different populations in that range. So that's really interesting to be able to combine like photometry and spectroscopy. So as I said, like we are interested in using photometry and spectroscopy. So how you obtain the photometry? So for that aim, I use a code which is called Hostford, which was developed by Thomas Müller, Juan de la Cierva fellow here, and so my supervisor, Jus Galvany. And what this code does, which is like quite useful, is basically you can get like global and local photometry. So basically what it does is that you put an input of the coordinates, you put certain radii, and it just downloads the images on different surveys that you want, like in like, let's say 2 or 3 lines of code, which is quite good. And then for the global, what it does, it just creates an ellipse in terms of the flux that you can get. You can also like do some masking, correct extinction, which makes its code honestly quite useful. And yeah, obviously can be used for other stuff, not just for this. So one step further would be using Prospector. So Prospector is another like spectral synthesis code, but instead of using templates as Starlight does, it's based on Bayesian inference. So you need to put some like initial values, but also some priors to like your inputs, and then you get that, and you obtain an output that looks like that in terms of like the different variables. The main difference, as I said, is that here you need to put your priors before you just needed to put your spectra. This makes it more useful, but also like needs more work because you need like to study and understand which are the proper priors. Otherwise, you will get like unreliable star formation histories. So this is like an example from the Hubbard proposal that U.S. Galvin wrote, just to show you a bit more clearly why like photometry is so important. So in green, you can see the fitting that you would obtain just like putting the spectra in black. This is like our data, and in green, this is the fitting that the code obtains. So just to get you an idea, if you add photometry, the values change here, as I showed you before. But the interesting thing here is that the output of the code gives like different edges in terms of what photometry you add. So you can see here that if you just say, okay, just put only the photometry, you get different values if you just like add them. That's why it's so important, because as I said before, you would get different like distribution of ages and metallicities, and that would be a huge problem because probably you will be doing like your fitting's good, but your results wouldn't be reliable. So what I do after I get like the output of these codes. So basically I obtain a normalization and subtraction of the spectra to get like the stellar pair and the gas pair separated. Then we feed emission lines. We do some corrections, Balmer decrement, these things. And then we get the interesting part for our science, metallicities, age mass distribution, star formation rate, a specific star formation rate, and this reference. So just to show you an example, this is like in blue, this is the observed flux, the input that I put. In red, you can see the Starlight feed. This is the stellar component just. And then what we do is to subtract. So in black, which is the subtracted flux, we obtain the gas. Basically, that's what we use to feed the emission lines. And here, like we can see just the normalized flux that we use to compute the equivalent widths. So once we've done this, we obtain emission lines, and we can draw also some kind of diagrams like the BPT diagram, which is used for characterizing the activity and the stellar formation of a galaxy. And we are interested in doing BPTs, probably not directly to do BPTs because it's something that is more applied to like galaxy studies, but because we are interested in eliminating any kind of EGN contamination. We need to be aware that we are studying galaxies that can host an EGN, so this can contaminate because it also has like some potential emission lines. So what we do is to apply a BPT to all of our sample, and we eliminate all these factors that contain values that could be due to EGN and not like stellar formation. And one thing that is worth noticing with these maps and this analysis is that I am using that for analyzing the environments of supernovae, but this can be used for other kind of studies, such as galaxies or very different stuff. For instance, right now, I am working with Maria, one of the postdocs here, and I am just like drawing maps of emission lines to do some analysis on the supernova remnants. So if any of you want to do any kind of like mapping of galaxies and obtaining like emission line maps for doing some kind of, I don't know, EGN, H2 regions or any kind of analysis like that, just like contact me, because this will be like available for like, will be public for free. So don't hesitate to contact me. So yeah, this is an example of like two metallicity index that we obtain, because one of the things that we know is that like the metallicity of host galaxies is correlated with the luminosity. So here we can see an example of the O3 and 2. And then for the D16, here we see like value of the calibration, and this is like just the spark cells. And as I said, we can obtain emission line maps. And here I show you the flags of the O3 5007 emission line. And here I show you the star formation rate, which can be computed directly using a simple calibration using like the flags of the H alpha. So I explain what I've done, doing like creating this analysis and testing it. So now I will explain further how I am using like all of these maps, what I'm doing with them, and the projects that I involve. So this is like one of the main projects that I'm working right now. So basically, as I said in the introduction, it's important to understand that the spectroscopy properties can be important in order to like improve the standardization. So here we can see a plot of Pan et al. 2020. And what they do, they study like different properties of these like host galaxies in terms of the velocities, in terms of the normal and high velocities. So I am just like extending the study, because instead of just doing this, I am doing like global and local analysis. So instead of studying in just like one place, I said that study the whole galaxy and extend it to the. And this is done for the logarithm of stellar mass. This is done for the specific star formation rate. So we are trying to infer if there are some noticeable differences between the local and the global, and to see if like this changes a lot from this base. So thank you a lot for listening to me. Sorry for all the technical problems that we had. And just a bonus, like I am like participating in a SNe outreach contest. Please considering supporting my video, because like the prize is like funding for research. And yeah, here you have the QR if you want just to like keep a like or something. And yeah, I will be happy to answer all the questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
I have a question. We know now that there is a migration of the stars for the different parts of the galaxy. This is due to the interaction of the stars with the asymmetries of the galaxy. In the case of type 1 supernova, especially in the case of the double white dwarfs, the time that the system takes between forming and exploding, it can be very large. My question is how you can correlate the local properties with the properties of the star if this star was born far away from the position. For instance, in the case of the solar system, we know that the sun formed near the bulge, and it has moved about 5 kiloparsecs along its life.
Good question. So I am just trying to think. So one of the good things of like studying like spatially all the properties is that you can infer like what are the different populations that you may have in this galaxy, and which are like younger and older and more prone to move or not. I'm not sure how I should like quantify this, but my guess should be that you should like study like the galaxy as like at all, and then like the local values, and probably like using like the star formation rate and the specific star formation rate, you could infer some kind of analysis in that. But yeah, I need to think about it. That's a good question, actually.
So in the last plot you showed before,
This one?
yeah, you're using 1 kiloparsec.
Yeah.
Is there any specific reason why you're using one, or are you using other?
So yeah, that's an example actually. So what I am doing for the analysis is to do a radii of 1, 2, 3 kiloparsecs. 3 of them just like I just put it 1, but I have like 3. Usually like you want to get like a radii which is small enough to be like local, let's say, but at the same time that allows you to get like enough resolution just to not have 1 pixel, let's say, because depending on the resolution of the survey, if you get like super small radii, probably like you want more resolution than the actual survey spatial resolution you have, if that makes sense.
This means that in each case you are, this is some sort of parameter for you, for your analysis.
Yeah, usually like people, they put like this kind of radii, or sometimes like they put on areas instead of like radii, but yeah, that's around like few kiloparsecs, not more than 5 kiloparsecs.
Yeah. I'm waiting to finish here and go there.
So yeah, let's see what. No, this is like the link. Not sure if like.
Cristina, there's a hand raised online
Yes, no.
by Aldo.
So let's thank her again. And
Cristina,